Hi, this is John Halliday, Flash Jazz Cat. We're going to have a look in this video at the new version of FDISK4 APT, which I've been working on lately. Hopefully this is going to be pretty much a final version of the partition editor. It's been in development for about 3 years now. It's come through various different incarnations since we first wrote the soft driver for my IDE, and we needed a partition editor for that, and it's been through various modifications, most recently to support the APT standard, which KMK designed. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're using the Altera emulator, and it's emulating the Ultimate 1 megabyte Side 2 PBI hard disk. So the first thing we'll do is we'll pop into the BIOS and enable that hardware. We'll select on with button, save it, quit, reboot. Sparta.x boots up, and then we'll run FDISK, and we'll assume for the purposes of this demonstration that the card or the disk is completely blank. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a small fat partition, which is in fact it's going to be suitable for Conrad's FAT16 driver for Sparta.x, so I'll make it about 31 megabytes, and an APT. So we'll choose initialize disk. Now this version of FDISK is different because I found that it was useful, or thought it would be useful, to be able to partition different devices that were attached to the PBI bus at the same time. I've got a 1200 XL computer which has got an IDEA hard disk built into it, and that runs a custom APT BIOS which I wrote for that interface, which I'll release fairly shortly. And also either the soft driver for Sparta.x or the Ultimate 1 megabyte and side PBI, and these can be run simultaneously. In fact, you could run all three at the same time. So what this version of FDISK does is it pulls all the available PBI handlers. So what you'll get here, I can't demonstrate it in the emulator, but what you would get here if you had the soft driver and Ultimate 1 megabyte and side PBI, or another compatible interface like the IDE Plus 2.0, you would get a list of all the available devices. So you'll see that each device has a unique hierarchical ID consisting of 3 digits. In this case it's 0.1.1. And there's only one item on the list because that's all I can actually use in emulation. The first digit is actually the PBI device ID. I've decided to put that first. That's the other way around to what's described in the APT API documentation, which you can find on my website. So the first thing, you've got the PBI ID, which is 0, which corresponds to 1 in the Ultimate 1 megabyte BIOS screen. The next one is the bus ID, which is a kind of a arbitrary identifier. In this case it's referring to a PBI device. 0 means an SIO device, and if you were using a soft driver you'd find a number 2 there. And the final digit is the device ID, which simply refers to, most commonly, as master and slave. So your primary device, your primary master device is 1. So each ID is completely unambiguous, so no matter how many disks, master, slave devices, each one has a unique ID. So what we'll do is we'll open this generic device. Now there's obviously some information already on the disk, so it's detected this and just gives you a warning that if we proceed, it's going to overwrite what's on the disk. So this is the new initialize disk dialog. It's fairly straightforward. It works pretty much as you'd expect. Tab moves through the fields. Shift tab moves back through the fields. Or you can use the left and right arrows to move around. A spacebar toggles checkboxes. As you can see, if you turn off the master boot record, you can't therefore have a FAT on the disk, which makes sense, so that defaults to none, and the FAT size text box is no longer selectable. We'll turn that back on because we do want a master boot record and a FAT. Also, it's worth pointing out that if you clear MBR, there'll be no protective MBR container on the disk, so the first sector of the APT will go straight into LBA sector 0 on the hard disk. Generally, you'll want to have an MBR on the disk, even if you don't want to have a FAT partition. If you don't want any FAT partitions on the disk, just leave that FAT set to none. In that case, your APT would start probably on sector 63, but with the MBR in place, it just stops Windows from trying to format the disk. So what we're going to have is a FAT16 partition. So we just cursor down, press enter to choose that one, close the drop down list. Now we move into size, we'll have a 31 megabyte FAT16 partition. This disk's 500 well, it's actually 512 megabytes. There's been some rounding down there. I'm going to make the APT 256 megabytes, just leave us a little bit of space on the disk, just in case we need it later on. And when you're happy with everything, just press enter, and there's the empty APT space on the disk. The editor's been pretty much completely redesigned. I've done away with the empty space, used space kind of model. Now you simply press enter on an empty entry, type in the size of the partition you want, and just keep doing that. Give it a drive number. You can use the menus as well if you want to. So that would be set drive, brings up the same thing. BPS will leave. That's the sector, that's the density of the partition. You might want to make drive C the boot partition, or just press B, or we can do the same thing by set BPS. So in the simplest sense, that's going to give you a working hard disk. We'll go into write table, asks if you want to write to the disk, we'll say yes, and then it's successfully updated. To prove that, we'll close the disk, open it again, and there we are. Now you notice the start sector reflects the beginning of the APT, so that's just skipped over that 31 megabytes of space we reserved for that FAT16 partition, which we haven't formatted yet. Now what we can do now, finally, because Conrad's written these FAT drivers for Sparta-DOS X, is we can place an entry which refers to that FAT16 partition. We can place it inside of the APT. So we'll go into partition, make external, And there's that fat partition that we set up when we initialized the disk. And if there are more fat partitions, say if we had a FAT32 partition there as well, that'll show up on the list. Just choose the one you want, press enter, and you can see it's put a reference to that fat partition at the top of the table. It just keeps them in sector order. Now you can't change the size of this external partition. You can give it a drive number. We'll call it drive F. You could set the boot flag as well. You probably wouldn't want to. It depends how fluid use of FAT becomes in the future in Sparta-DOS X. So we can write that to the disk again. There we go. And we'll just double check that that took. Open the disk. And there we are. Now the only point to remember is that if you change the partition geometry of the disk significantly, that reference to that fat partition could become invalid if that partition disappears. If you want to get rid of it at any point, because we can't edit the size, we can just delete it. We can either go into partition, delete entry, or we can press Ctrl D and that takes it away. There's a few other things I've changed, quite a lot of things actually. If you want to set up a lot of partitions in the APT space, there's an easy way to do it. We'll just go into split and divide. Now the way this works, you can either type in the number of partitions that you want and the program will just split the available space into n partitions of whatever size, equal sizes. Or you can type in the size of the partitions you want and it will fill the available space with as many partitions of that size as will fit. Or you can govern that with a number of partitions as well, so we can specify the size and quantity or both. For example, we'll tell it to make 20 partitions. It'll clear the original table. So here we go, we've got 20 partitions which happen to be 26,213 sectors in size. We can also view these partitions in megabytes rather than sectors. We can do that in the view menu with show megabytes, or we can just press M to toggle that feature. And bear in mind there's a certain amount of rounding involved, so the first time you switch to megabyte view, and then if you edit in megabyte view, when the sector size of a partition is calculated from megabyte input, it might come out a different number of sectors to what it was when it was rounded up to megabytes in the first place. If it's complicated to explain, pretty easy to demonstrate, which I will in a minute, but I'll just show you this autofill feature again. Split and divide. Because we're in megabyte view at the moment, any sizes, any sector, any partition sizes that you type in should be typed in megabytes. So for example, if you type in 31 megabytes, it'll give you as many 31 megabyte partitions as will fit into the space. Alternatively, if you want 31 megabyte partitions but you only want 4 of them, just type in the number there and that's what it gives you. Now, so that's a pretty easy way to fill the disk with partitions, and then you just need to step through them, give them drive numbers, etc., and then save the partition table to disk, and that's it. Now going back to this size conversion thing, we'll erase everything. The standard 32 megabyte partition that Sparta.x wants to see is 65535, and we'll go back to sector view. .65535 sectors, which is just shy of 32 megabytes by one sector. Now if we go into megabyte view, that comes up as 31.99 megabytes. If we go back to sector view, again, nothing's changed. Now, we'll if we go into megabyte view and then edit the size, even if we don't change anything, and press enter, that partition has changed in size, which we can see when we go back into the other view. Because because of the rounding, the inaccuracy of only having 2 decimal places, there's some truncation, if you like. So it's just something to bear in mind. It's perfectly logical, really. So if you need to amend, you can fine-tune the size of the partitions. Most commonly, you would probably have 32 megabyte partitions, which happen to come up as 65536 sectors, which is just one more than we really need. So most of the time anyway, until support for much larger partitions exists, you probably want to set them up in sector view. We can still list things by name. If you give a partition a name, we'll call this one boot. I'll have another partition, I'll call that one data. So we can view the names instead. We still edit the sizes as we did before. I don't use that view much myself. The other thing is by default this editor puts a 1 sector metadata record ahead of each partition. So when you add a partition 65,535 sectors long, you're actually consuming 1 more sector than that. So that's sort of silently deducted from the free sector count at the bottom. And in addition to that, we've also got, when you have more than 15 partitions, there's an additional overhead of the actual partition table records themselves. So subsequently for every 31 partitions you create, there'll be another 1 sector deducted from the free total. It's much easier to handle that kind of thing using this kind of partition editor, where everything is floats to the top after each edit. That was the primary reason for changing the way things work. So anyway, we'll go ahead, we'll set these partitions up. We'll change the size of that one back down. Okay, set the boot flag on that one. I must apologise, I'm using the keyboard shortcuts that you can see on the menu. We'll write this one out to disk. In fact, no, we'll add the external partition again. We'll call that one drive F. We'll write this out to disk. Okay. We'll close the program. Okay, and then we'll reboot. Alright. Then we'll try do a directory. That partition must have fallen in the same spot as it previously was. Okay, and then we can start to format them. Format D. Okay. So there's partition D. Everything works pretty much as expected. So that's more or less it. Hopefully you find this new partition editor useful. And in the next video I'll demonstrate, I'll run through how to use the FAT driver in Sparta-DOS X. So until then, goodbye.